The Assembly member for raising this issue. I understand how distressing this is for residents and leaseholders currently living in tower blocks with cladding that is or may be unsafe. Frustratingly, the government has repeatedly failed to act with urgency on this issue. After much delay in spring 2018, all local authorities were required by the government to compile a list of tall privately owned tower blocks with metal cladding in their areas. Local authorities then contacted building owners to confirm the cladding type or urged them to get it tested. Formal notices were issued against any owner who failed to come forward. My team have been working closely with boroughs and London councils to support this work. The London Fire Brigade and James Murray, the Deputy Mayor for Housing, attend a monthly fire safety meeting convened by London councils with all housing directors from all London boroughs, as well as MHCLG. 14 months on from Grenfell, this belated action from government means the number of affected blocks is nearly finalised. According to the government, there are 60 private tower blocks left across England where the cladding is still unconfirmed. Around half of these are likely to be London buildings. While progress has now been made in identifying at-risk private tower blocks, little has been achieved in actually remediating these buildings. To help assure residents, the London Fire Brigade has established a high-rise task force through which they have already visited 85 privately owned tower blocks in London to advise them on interim fire measures to mitigate the risk to residents from fire while the cladding has been replaced. The government did announce a national task force and a joint inspection team to help get dangerous cladding replaced, but I understand this inspection team is still not up and running. What's more, ministers are still not fully addressing the issue of who foots the bill. And as we know, disputes over costs are causing unacceptable delays in replacing this cladding and leaving leaseholders facing sky-high bills. Back in February, I wrote to ministers saying the government should pay up front for any unnecessary remedial works to make a building safe, and they can then claim back costs from the building owner or other appropriate body. That would ensure costs do not fall on individual leaseholders and that people are not left in limbo. It took 11 months for the government to take concerted action on social sector blocks. They finally agreed to make money available for this, and the GLA has agreed to administer up to £275 million of this to go to social landlords in London. Even more so than in the social sector, the government have consistently dragged their feet over helping residents in private sector blocks, and so it's essential we keep up the pressure on them.
Well, thank you for that comprehensive answer. Could I give you the example of Premier House Edgware in my constituency? You may recall me raising this building with you a couple of years ago when it was controversially converted from office to residential under the government's permitted development rights rules rather than proper planning permission. Whilst the London Fire Brigade say there are good fire protection measures internally, when the brigade inspected it last June, they found the tower block has ACM cladding. The brigade are now having regularly to visit the block, and the building is subject to a simultaneous evacuation policy. Government guidance says the cladding should be removed. Isn't this an example of both the problems caused by permitted development rights and the approach of private sector landlords?
I mean, it's a case study in the consequences of some of the government's policies. Permitted development rights allow the owner of the office block normally to turn it into housing without due regard to the normal planning process, a bit like garden developments taking place under the government's policies. But also you've just reminded us of the frustration, anxiety and fear residents are probably feeling in the interim. And what the government should be doing is paying for the cladding to be replaced and then agreeing with the owner or somebody else how it's paid for. In the meantime, you've got this ridiculous interim measures. The London Fire Brigade diverted towards this residential building and the residents living in fear. It can't be right.
Thank you for that. Are you aware that Gary Strong, the Global Building Standards Director at the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, told us at the Fire Committee that some building owners don't want to disclose they have this really expensive problem, some are reluctant even to get their cladding tested, and some didn't want to tell the government about it. He said that the number of affected private buildings was about 600, far more than the official figure. So will you work with the LFB and boroughs to establish just how many privately owned tower blocks with flammable cladding there are in London, independent of self-reporting, and help residents find out if their homes are clad in flammable material?
Listen, I'm sure the London Fire Brigade and ourselves are very happy to look into what you're suggesting. The only thing I just remind us of is our limited powers. We can't force private developers to give us access. Local authorities are doing their best with limited circumstances, but you make a very important point about, is there full disclosure? Is there more that we can be doing to get full disclosure? So let me look into the work of the committee and see what we can do going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.